Hey guys, Kane here. Welcome to my channel. In today's video I am going to show you about arithmetics and conversion of data, particularly string data to number formats. And we're gonna build up a calculator application. We are going to learn about these conversions, how to do arithmetics, how to validate data, and so forth. And this is gonna be a rather long video, so without losing any more time, let's get started. First thing first, we're gonna go into the file menu and create a new project. From there, make sure that Windows Form Applications under Visual C# is selected. And just for the name of the project, I'm just gonna call this Calculator App. Once I have done it, I'll just create a new form and rename that form as well as the Calculator App. I'm just doing this stuff for consistency purposes, like the project name matches kind of like the form name, and yeah, that's it. Now we are going to create a couple of components here. Particularly I need a text box, which I'm gonna get it from the list. So let me just get it, yeah, and change its properties, obviously make it slightly bigger. So I'm gonna go into the font part and select a font that I assume every computer has with the regular font style and make it quite big, like 16. I will go down, I'll make sure that there's no text inside and find the max length property. Now I want to make sure that this one is not the max length that is given by default, which is the integer max length, and I want to make sure that it's like no longer than like 3 or something, just to limit the number of characters for the user to enter. We are gonna change the name of the component as well, but just before I do that, I'm just gonna copy and paste another one, exactly the same, like that. Now I'm gonna go into the toolbox menu, and I'm gonna select a label. With the label, I'm just gonna inform the users about what kind of data they have to enter to these fields. Unless you put them, the user might not know what to put there. So make sure to provide some initial information when you create these components. For the first one, I'm just gonna call it inside the text field. Where is it? Let's find that down. Yeah, text one is here. So just gonna call it number one. Whoops, it's the Turkish character here. Gotta change it to English, yeah. Yes, and number one should be in here. And I'm gonna do exactly the same for number two. These are like design stuff. Like you can change it however you like. It doesn't have to be just as I'm building up in here. It could be completely something else. At the end of the day, a UI should make sense to user, but the way that you design it is completely up to you. So I'm gonna put this one in here as well, like make it a little bit small and put a couple of buttons. Each one I will link up with the mathematical equation. So just gonna go in here again to the properties part and type a plus one. I will make sure that this one also has the same font, and it's like the other ones, quite big. So the button for me in here is ready, and I'm just gonna copy and paste it for a number of times. Can make it like that, yeah. Very good. So we have a plus button. The second one would be a minus one. The third one will be a multiplication one. And the fourth one will be a division one. Can do them like this, or if you want to provide a more realistic kind of like signs as we see in math. You can go in and Google like division sign or whatever, and it will come out in the results. And just copy paste that one and put it in there. Yeah, there you go. Now next stage is to show the result at some place, so it's best to copy again one of these and put it in there. Now in this specific exercise, instead of showing the result on a message box, I'm gonna show it on a label, which is gonna be very similar, but instead of seeing it there, we'll see it on the form. So I'm gonna drag and drop another label, and this time I'm just gonna change the font color for it, like something like blue. Make it quite big. Around 18 or whatever. And that's where the result will be. So it's just put in here, result. Whatever result we're gonna get from these equations, it will be listed in here. Now that our UI is kind of like ready, what we're gonna do is to basically give names to each and every one of these components. So I'm gonna go in here and name them. This is very important, as I mentioned in the previous video. You must give meaningful names to your components. So this one, I'm just gonna name it as txt number 1, and the second one as txt number 2. For each and every single button, I will do the same. Just type btn, and at, and the next one as btn sub, btn mul, and finally btn div. Yes, the UI is more or less ready. The last thing I'm just gonna modify is label result here, which is going to be used for the result. So we have text number 1, number 2, add button, which is button add, button sub, button mul, button div, and finally label result. I am not going to name these labels because they're just there for display purposes. They don't have any other role. They're not going to change ever in the program. They're just there to show static data, so you don't have to name them. Now the next stage is to double click on each and every single button that you see, so that the relevant function will be triggered. You can also go to the lightning symbol in here and double click on this part to make sure that the click property is going to be selected. You can also select a list, select a function from the list, but the easiest way to do is just double click on it, so you trigger the functions that will be written in here. So when we go to the code side, we have to kind of like set variables for our component. So under the partial class, which I have in here, I'm gonna come and create my variables. First, I'm gonna create number 1 str, which will be the string equivalent of number 2 str, which is for number 2. I'm gonna convert these numbers to integer at some point, so I'm just gonna say number 1 and number 2. And finally, I will have a result in terms of double or float, because it's a real number. We don't get a real number when we add, subtract, and multiply numbers. So if we didn't have division, we could have defined the result as integer. However, because we have the division here, we must make sure that the result that we're gonna get can be a double number or a float one. So the division can end up with a decimal number, so we have to define that as a float value. Now that we got these variables in there, it's a nice idea to basically go back to the form and double click on any empty space in here. This will also trigger a function called function form load, and this something a function basically being triggered when the form is loaded for the first time to the user. There you can set up specific values so that the user see them differently than what you could set up in here. So what I'm gonna do with this one, for example, I have a text label, result in here. Is that label result? Yes, it is. And it says result in here, but when I go in there to the form load, I will set its property to nothing, so that when it is load, the user will not see anything. So I'm gonna run this thing. We can press on F5 on our keyboard, or just say start debugging. And as you can see, although in the design part it says like result, in here I don't see anything. We might also want to move these a little bit on the right side because they're just not looking very nice. I'm gonna move them to the right side a bit, like that. Yeah, and run it again. Yeah, it looks much nicer now. And despite that it says result in here, because of the form load, I don't see that part in here. The reason is I modified the form load and said that when the form is loaded, label result is basically empty. Now the next stage is to create our own method to make sure that these values will be obtained from the user and somehow converted. So I'm gonna come down in here and write my own function. So I'm gonna type private get numbers, something like this. It's a nice idea to give it a void because this function will not have a return type. It is just something that I'm gonna repeat for a number of times in the buttons to avoid any kind of code repetition. So in here I'm gonna name up the number 1 str to the component that I have. In order to reach components, you can use a keyword called this. This refers to this class, so it could be an easier way to obtain the components if you tend to forget their names. For example, I usually forget my component names, although I named them like 2-3 minutes ago. I tend to forget them, so I quite often use the keyword this. But even if you don't type that, your application will work fine. So if that confuses you, just erase it and it's fine. And after the text property, we're gonna set this up to string, and I am going to do exactly the same for number 2 as well, since I have 2 different numbers, hopefully. Well, they don't have to be different, but they're like in different fields. So we have this stuff, number 1 str, number 2 str as well. Now this is the point that you should understand how visual applications work. Whatever you type in here is actually a string. It's not a number data. Even if you type it like a number, the computer still regards that as data for a character. So it doesn't understand really that this is actually a number, because you can technically go and write ABC inside. So I limited both boxes as 3 characters, and when I press on this, it cannot add 1 to 5 with ABC because ABC is not a number yet. So we must make sure that these are somehow converted to numbers, and there are multiple ways to do it. The easiest way is to use the integer parse. Another method is to use the convert static class. So for this example, I'm going to use both and initialize one to number 1 and the other one to number 2. So I'll go down there and say number 1 is equals to integer parse, and put the brackets, and I will type the string value that I'd like to convert, which is number 1 str. Now with the second method is number 2 equals to using the convert class, and you just select the integer or double or float or whatever you want to convert it into. There's a huge list here, you can pick any choice, but most of the time we convert it to integer unless like there's something else that we have to deal with. So we're gonna put this one, curly brackets here, and type the number 2 str inside. So both ways, I see both ways on the internet, they are used quite often, so you stick to the one that you like the most. Now that these numbers are converted, there is the number 1 and number 2, as you can see in here, we can actually calculate the result. So we can come in here to any of these functions. Let's start with the add, and we're gonna say something like get numbers first, get them from the user. So just copy and paste this method, call it in here. Once you call the method, it will somehow do the conversion as these values are entered, and they will hopefully be converted to integer format. Once this is done, now we can do the calculation. For the addition, we can say something like result is equals to number 1 plus number 2. To set up the label tag, label result, you can use the text property and initialize it to a number. The easiest way to add it is to put result to string, or just result. You don't even have to type to string if you don't want to. You can, however, so it's completely again up to you. Let's try this one to see whether or not it's gonna work for us. So I'm just like debugging it now, and I see on the list that I don't have any errors, and I'm just gonna run it to see the outcome. So I'm gonna type something like 12 and 34 and press on the plus sign. 2 4 makes 6 and 1 3 makes 4, so that will make 46, which is the correct outcome. I press on the other ones, nothing happens yet, so we have to go back to the application and fill those ones as well. And guess what? Now that you have your method in here, the only thing you have to do for each and every one of these functions is to call this method first. Once you have called it, it will jump in here, do the conversions, and it will come back. Now you can write the proper mathematical expression for it. So for the next function, I have to write result equals to number 1 minus number 2, and then initialize that to label result. So this time, instead of putting the quotation marks like empty, I'm just gonna say result dot to string, which is like the other way of initializing a result, a variable, to a component in here. So once again, you use the way that is more suitable to you, or the more it makes sense, or whatever. Like, you stick up the model that you like the most. In programming, you must remember that there are usually multiple ways of solving the problem. There isn't one answer to everything, and it's nice to know their differences, because in some circumstances you cannot use one and you might need the other, and so forth. So use these solutions interchangeably, but also know that for this specific example, there's literally no difference between label result.text equals to quotation marks plus result and label result.text result to string. Now is the time that I'm gonna use it for the button division. This one is gonna be a little bit different because it's a division. So I'm gonna type result number 1 divided by number 2, but I will have to do this in terms of the value that I assign, which is the float value. So the value that was defined as float will be coming in here. And now whatever the value I got, I'll initialize it to label result.text and use the quotation marks plus the result. So let's see how this is gonna work for us. I'm gonna build up the solution. Once again, I see that I don't have any mistakes, and I'm gonna run this thing. So I'm gonna put 20 and 4 in here. So plus will be 16, minus will be 8, multiply will be 48, and division will be 3. Let's try to make this as 5 just to see if the division will be a decimal point. And yes, it is. As you can see, when there is a decimal point, it actually shows it on the label as well. So we managed to build a calculators and it works fine, but have we done with this yet? Not really. This is actually where your programming has to be a little bit smart now, so that whenever user types something, you don't make the program crash. So mismatch kind of data must be filtered in a visual application. You must make sure that the data is valid. A good example to this is, instead of numbers in here, let me just type letters. What will I have then? As you can see, when I press on the button, it triggered an error in here telling me that I can't convert this to a number because there's nothing to convert. So I must make sure first to stop the application and somehow handle this situation and make sure that the computer only accepts numbers for this specific exercise. A cheap way of doing this is to going into the key handler property for the text field, text box. So you press on this and go on to the key part, key pressed, this one, and you double click on it to activate the property. You can define a value in here is number equals to 0, and then E handled is going to be not integer, try parse, E key car to string, and out is number. So we want only the numbers to be available to be pressed using the key. Now this is going to create some sort of problems, although it will overcome the letter entries. As you can see, you might hear that I'm pressing on letters on my keyboard and nothing is happening. But when I press on numbers, I can actually see them on the screen. However, this also blocks the delete and the backspace keys on the keyboard, so it is a cheap way of dealing with the situation. Okay, so you can filter that. It is possible to release the back space and delete buttons, but I don't like this kind of cheap solutions, and I think something more stable could be done with this kind of problem. So you can use a solution in here, it's not like you can't, but a better solution is probably use an exception handling, just to make sure that the data is in the format that we want. And to use exception handling, we use two statements in programming. We call them try and catch, and they are used in many programming languages, specifically Java and C#, and they are used to basically filter errors, to make sure that the program handles the exceptions, the developer handles the exceptions themselves rather than leaving that to the compiler. So for the statements that I have written already within the getNumbers function, I take them, I encapsulate them into a try, as you can see. And just after that, I'll write a statement called catch, which is gonna filter the error, if there is any, and try to run this thing, and if it doesn't run it, it will jump into the catch point. For this catch, I'm gonna type an exception, and I'm just gonna call it X. Down here, you can try to display what the X is in a message box. You can say something like message box dot show and type the error. Please enter numbers to fields. You can even put a backspace n and show the error should you want to. Just gonna actually put more, and x dot toString. Make it toString. Let's see. Next, I'm gonna put a title for my message error. Put a button, just OK, and finally icons, which is going to be an error. So I managed to, it's just really long now that I don't see the end. So yeah, this is much better. Now I handled the error and I'm just telling the user to enter numbers when they don't. So if this conversion cannot be done now, the computer will automatically jump into this part and show me what the error is, and it will also trigger this message called please enter numbers to the fields. So let's just try this to see what kind of outcome we'll get. I'm gonna type ABC here just as I did before, and D, E, F in there, and press on the plus button. And it says please enter numbers to the field, and input string was not in a correct format. It triggers the error to me, so I can see that in now that the input string was not in a correct format. If you don't want your user to see the error, so once you have done your program and you just don't want to show this kind of lines, you can simply erase this toString part and also these two lines, these lines over here, and just leave it as a message. Please enter numbers to the text fields. That will be a much more user-friendly message, and so that they wouldn't also see the lines that we had to program. So I'm just gonna filter that information again, and as you can see, we offer the user a message, please enter numbers to the fields, when they do not enter it, and it doesn't show anything in here. And when I actually enter the numbers, it shows 0. It actually calculates it. As you can see, it does the job quite well. The final thing that we should do for this program is probably to add a button for resetting everything. So let's just add it in here, like this, and call it clear. I'm gonna go into the properties and call the button text as clear, and gonna follow the same font style as I did with the others, and make it bold as well. That will clear the entire text fields as well as the result. So make sure to put it in a name. Go down and name your button. Should be button clear. And double click on it. Once we have done this, we need to make sure that now the fields are completely empty. So I had text number 1 dot text, which should be 0, empty. We can do the same for number 2. We can do it for the label result. Instead of putting the empty, I'm just gonna put 0 to this one. And make sure also to initialize the values for your calculation. Like number 1 is 0, number 2 is 0, and finally your results is going to be 0. You can also initialize these to 0 and then initialize them to text number 1, number 2, and result. Is completely up to you how you handle it. But technically what I'm trying to do here, when this button is clicked, I'm gonna make everything 0 or empty. So I'm gonna run this thing once again, and hopefully the last time. And as you can see, I can go into the interface, type 15 and let's say 4, and plus, minus, multiply, divide, and when I press on clear, it just clears the form. So with this exercise, we have seen how we can interact with the components, like different kind of methods we can write. We can call methods inside other methods, like the way that we call getNumber inside every single button functionality, such as dividing, multiplying, subtracting, and adding. We also seen conversions, where you can convert data from one format to the other, such as in this one we got the integer parse number 1 str, and in the second one we use the convert static class. We also seen the exception handling with try and catch. So the computer first tries to execute this, and when it cannot, somehow it gets an error message, it automatically jumps to the catch part and runs this one. So I hope this video was helpful to you in order to understand the functionalities and how we handle visual programming. Hopefully in the next video I'm gonna show you more components regarding visual programming. So thank you for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.